40,000 adventurers have walked into my dungeon. 0 have died. In a horror game, that number is not a compliment. I am Ren Castellan, keeper of the easiest trial in the realm of Hollowmere, and for 3 years I have been very quietly, very deliberately, terrible at my job. Hollowmere is a courtship game with teeth. Travelers arrive half convinced they are going to die here, hoping to survive long enough to fall in love with whichever brooding horror waits at the center of the realm. Before they ever reach him, they pass through keepers like me, small trials meant to thin the herd and set the mood for everything that comes after. Every trial is themed to match whichever love interest waits beyond it. Down the road there is a graveyard maze that feeds into a broody vampire lord's throne room, and a drowned chapel that feeds into a priest who has clearly made some choices. Mine feeds into the Sable King himself, the realm's supposed final horror, which if you think about it for more than a second, should have made my particular failure a great deal more embarrassing than it apparently was. My inn is called Castellan's Rest. My dungeon is the cellar underneath it. The rulebook calls it the widow's trial, because I am, technically, a widow, and because someone in a meeting decided that detail was evocative. The bar in my common room is older than the inn's official founding date, carved edge to edge with names, 3 years of them, left by everyone who has walked out of my cellar alive. I have never quite explained, even to myself, why the wood feels warm where the names are. I did not choose comically easy. I chose it 3 years ago, on a Tuesday, at the exact moment they carried my husband's body up out of that same cellar. Callum kept this trial before me. He was better at looking frightening than I am and worse at staying detached, which in the rulebook's language turns out to be the same sin. Near the end of a long, cruel season, a boy through half-starved and already broken by 2 other trials before mine. Callum let him rest instead of finishing the maze the way it was written. He gave the boy bread instead of a monster. The warden who found out did not call that kindness. She called it an unauthorized modification of sanctioned content, and under the rules of Hollowmere, a keeper who breaks the sanctioned script can be deleted on the spot, permanently, no respawn, no patch note, just gone. They did that to Callum in front of me, and they did it fast, like they were embarrassed by how long it had taken them to get around to it. So I took the trial over. And I made a decision nobody in this realm has managed to argue me out of since. If mercy was the crime, I would simply never let anyone need it. No traveler would ever be close enough to dying that I would have to choose whether to save them. I would just make sure they were never in danger to begin with. 40,000 runs, 0 deaths, 0 mercy technically, because you cannot show mercy to someone who was never at risk. It is, I will admit, a very small, very stubborn loophole to build 3 years of grief around. The trick is the hearth. My dungeon and my fireplace share a pulse, an old bit of keeper magic nobody has bothered updating since the realm's earliest builds. I feel every footstep on that cellar floor the way you would feel a moth land on the back of your hand. It is how I know exactly when to swap the spring-loaded spikes for the blunt ones, exactly when to walk Biscuit out of a doorway before he sits on somebody by accident. Biscuit is my final boss. He is a dire wolf the size of a cart horse, older than the inn itself, and he would like a belly rub please, if you have one to spare. My haunted suit of armor was supposed to be a jump scare. These days it mostly asks visitors if they are drinking enough water. None of that is an accident. All of it is maintenance. 3 years of very careful, very exhausting maintenance, performed by a woman the rulebook still insists on calling terrifying. I might have gotten away with this forever if not for Update 6. The notice came nailed to my own front door in Warden's ink, which burns faintly until you have read it. 9 days, it said. 9 days until Hollowmere's next patch goes live, and with it, a new clause: every sanctioned trial must log a minimum threat exposure per run, or be flagged for revision. Flagged for revision is Warden language. Everyone in this realm knows what it actually means. I read it twice at the bar, the parchment trembling slightly in my hand, and told myself it was not trembling because I was afraid. It was trembling because the door has a draft. The door has always had a draft. I have told myself a great many reasonable-sounding things over 3 years. Warden Celine Drager arrived before the ink had even finished burning, which she did not need to do in person and did anyway, because auditing me personally is apparently the highlight of her quarter. She is the kind of beautiful that reads as a warning label. She carries a ledger that writes itself, tallying dread the way a merchant tallies coin. And in 3 years I have never once seen her finish a drink she ordered. 0, she said, setting the ledger on my bar like evidence. She did not look up from it. 40,000 runs in a flat zero. Do you know what a number like that does to a realm that survives on fear, widow Castellan? I told her I imagined it saved on bandages. She looked up then, just for a second, long enough for me to see she did not find that funny, and did not appreciate being made to consider finding it funny. You have 9 days, she said. Fix the numbers or update 6 rewrites this trial for you. I do not especially care which. She left without finishing her cider. She never does. I have started to wonder if that is a message too. I did not have 9 days to fix a problem I had spent 3 years building on purpose. I had 9 days to figure out how to lose without losing anyone. He came in that same night, same as every Tuesday for the last 4 months, and settled into the same corner table like the wood had grown a chair specifically for him. I do not know his last name, I never asked. He orders the stew, always the stew, pays exactly on time, and speaks so rarely that the regulars have started making bets about what his voice even sounds like. There is a scar along one forearm that never quite finished healing, and a thin dusting of pale ash across one sleeve I had assumed, for 4 months, was just travel dust from wherever he came from. I never asked about that either. What I noticed that particular night was that the guards who usually drink by the door went quiet when he walked past them. Not rude quiet, careful quiet, the kind you use around something you have decided not to look at directly. I set his stew down without being asked. He said thank you without looking up, the way he always does, like he is still deciding whether he is allowed to be somewhere warm. You look tired, he said. It was the most words he had said to me in a month. I told him I was fine. He did not argue, which somehow felt worse than if he had. I refilled water nobody asked for and found an excuse to wipe down a counter that was already clean, which is what I do instead of thinking about things directly. He watched me do it with the particular patience of a man who has clearly watched people avoid things before. Bad week, he asked. Bad 9 days, I said before I could stop myself. He did not ask what that meant, he just nodded, like he already understood something about deadlines I did not, and went back to his stew. I decided not to think too hard about that. I had a very long list, by then, of things I had decided not to think too hard about. Later, after he had gone, I found the shutter above the second table fixed. It had been hanging by one hinge for a week, banging every time wind came off the ridge, and I had not had a spare hour to deal with it. It was not banging anymore. Nobody in the common room would admit to touching it. I did not see him do it, I never do. Things at Stellan's Rest simply become slightly less broken on Tuesdays, and everyone has agreed, wordlessly, not to make it strange by mentioning it out loud. I stood there a minute with my hand on the fixed hinge, doing the thing where you let yourself feel warm about something small so you do not have to feel anything large about something else. 0 deaths. A husband 3 years gone, and a stranger who fixes shutters without being thanked for it. It was, on balance, a very complicated Tuesday. Old Nell Osgood found me still standing at that hinge, arms crossed, doing my best impression of a woman who was fine. She has kept the healer shelves at Castellan's Rest since before I was born into this rulebook, which is her way of saying she is older than the realm's second expansion and has earned the right to worry about people out loud. She was here the day they carried Callum's body up those stairs. She was the one who closed his eyes before the warden's report even finished being written. 9 days, I told her, because she would have heard anyway, and I would rather she hear it from me than from Draeger's ledger. 9 days, or they rewrite the trial for me. She did not say anything comforting. Nell has never once in 3 years said anything comforting. She just refilled my cup without asking and sat down across from me like she had all the time in the realm, which, given her age, she basically did. You built that cellar out of grief, she said finally. That does not make it wrong. It just means you built something that was never going to hold up to an audit, because grief was never meant to pass an audit, it was meant to be survived. I asked her what she thought I should do. Survive the audit anyway, she said, you are annoyingly good at that. Then she got up, patted my shoulder once hard, the way you would steady a shelf that was about to tip, and went back to her shelves without waiting for me to answer. Draeger came back 4 days later, that left 5. She brought a second warden with her this time, a quiet, nervous man named Aldrich Penn, who mostly stared at the floorboards and would not meet my eyes, which told me everything about how this visit was going to go before she said a word. Let me explain how this realm actually works, she said, since you seem confused. She did not wait for me to say I was not. Every trial in Hollowmere produces one of 2 currencies, dread, which is fear, danger, the thrill of nearly dying and living to brag about it afterward. Or hearth, the soft, sentimental, largely worthless feeling of having been treated kindly somewhere. Hollowmere runs on dread, it always has, it is quite literally what keeps the realm's lights lit. Hearth, I asked. Hearth is what a keeper produces when she is too soft to her job, she said. It is charming, it is also not in the budget. The second warden flinched at that, just slightly. I noticed it and filed it away the way I file away most things I do not have time to think about yet. You have 5 days, Draeger said. My recommendation, if you would like it, is to let something genuinely bad happen in that cellar before the patch forces the issue for you. One good scare, one near miss with real teeth in it, does not have to be a tragedy, it just has to be a number. I told her that in 3 years nobody who came through that cellar had needed stitches, let alone a funeral, and I considered that a professional achievement, not a failure. She looked at me the way you would look at a core you were tired of explaining. 0 is not an achievement, Widow Castellan. 0 is a rounding error the directors are going to notice eventually, and when they do, they are not going to ask me why I let it happen. They are going to ask why I let it happen twice. She left the ledger open on the bar a moment longer than she needed to, like she wanted me to sit with the number a while. 40,000 0. It looked less like a statistic and more like a debt. 5 days, she said again on her way out, as if I might have forgotten in the last 4 seconds. Then, almost gently, almost like she meant it kindly, fix it yourself, or I will fix it for you. You will not enjoy my version. 5 days is not a lot of time to solve a problem I had spent 3 years building brick by careful brick. So I did the only sensible thing available to me. I went back to work and let the inn distract me, because Castellan's Rest does not stop running just because its keeper is quietly panicking. Tamsin Rill came through that afternoon with her 2 companions, 17 years old, and shaking so hard her chainmail rattled, absolutely certain she was about to die in my cellar exactly the way the rulebook promised she might. She did not die in my cellar, she met Biscuit. Biscuit, to be fair, does look like he could end a bloodline, cart horse-sized, ash-gray eyes like lantern glass. He rose up out of the dark right on cue, exactly as terrifying as the script demanded, and Tamsin screamed exactly as loudly as the script rewarded. Then he sat down, put his enormous head in her lap, and sighed like an old married man settling into his favorite chair. She came up out of that cellar 40 minutes later, still pale, still shaking, laughing so hard she could barely stand, and asked if she could come back tomorrow just to see the wolf again, not to finish the trial faster, not to prove herself to anyone, just to see the wolf. That is the part no warden's report ever measures. They tally the scream. They never tally the girl carving her initials into my counter afterward, grinning, hands still shaking from delight instead of terror, right next to 1,000 other names that did the exact same thing. Nell grabbed my wrist hard enough to make me drop the rag I was holding later that night, once the common room had mostly cleared. You went gray again, she said, low so nobody else would hear. That is the 3rd time this moon. You keep doing that, and one of these nights you will not come back up those cellar stairs at all. I told her I was fine. It is, at this point, the thing I say most often in my own inn. Word travels fast between keepers and not kindly. Garrick Thorne keeps the Bone Orchard 2 ridges over, a trial so enthusiastically lethal that adventurers arrive at his gate already composing their wills, which he considers a point of professional pride. He stopped by the next morning, ostensibly for the cider, actually to gloat. Heard the warden circling you again, he said, settling onto a stool like he owned it. 0 in 40,000. I lost count of my own number around year 1, Widow Castellan. You could learn something from a man who takes his trials seriously. I told him I took mine seriously too, just in a different direction. He laughed like I had said something genuinely charming and genuinely foolish at the same time. That is the trouble with soft keepers, he said. You confuse being liked with doing the job. The realm does not run on being liked. I have since learned exactly how wrong he was about that. At the time, with 4 days on the clock and no proof to argue with, I just refilled his cider and let him enjoy being right for 1 more week. It felt that morning like all I could afford to give him. Not every keeper in Hollowmere thinks like Garrick Thorne. Mira Holt, who keeps the toll bridge 2 villages north and has never once produced a single point of dread in her entire tenure, sent a runner with a jar of her own preserves and a note that said only, "For what it's worth, mine's 0 too, and I've stopped apologizing for it." I did not know what to do with that except eat the preserves and cry a little, quietly in the pantry, where nobody could see me being sentimental about jam. Drager returned the next day, 3 days left on the notice, no second warden this time, just her and the ledger and a patience that had clearly run out somewhere on the road over. 3 days, Widow Castellan. I have been generous, the directors have not asked me to be. I told her I was still working on it, which was true in the sense that panicking counts as work if you do enough of it. She set the ledger down harder than she needed to. Mercy wasn't in the contract when your husband tried it either, she said. I did not write that rule, I only enforce it. And I would very much rather not enforce it twice in one lifetime, so do us both a favor and give me a number that isn't 0. There is a very specific kind of quiet that fills a room after someone mentions your dead husband's death like a scheduling inconvenience. My hands found the edge of the bar before I told them to. I did not say anything, because the things available to say would either get me deleted for insubordination or get me nowhere, and I did not have 3 days to spend finding out which. She left without the cider again. 3 days sat on the counter afterward where the ledger had been, invisible, impossible to wipe off. I tried, before it came to what it came to. I want that on the record, even if no ledger in Halamir will ever carry it. 2 days before the deadline, I told Biscuit to bare his teeth a little longer than usual for a group of 6 veteran adventurers who looked hardened enough to handle it. I let a trap fraction closer than comfortable. I let the haunted armor skip the part where it asks about hydration and just loom, silently, the way it was originally built to. They laughed. All 6 of them. One asked if Biscuit did birthday parties. Word of the widow's trial had traveled further than I realized. Nobody walks into my cellar frightened anymore, because everybody has already heard from someone that they do not need to be. I had spent 3 years building a reputation so gentle it was now armor-plated against my own attempts to dismantle it. I stood at the top of my own cellar stairs that night and understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives once it is too late to be useful, that I could not simply choose to fail a little. The thing I had built did not have a smaller setting. He came in that night even though it was not Tuesday, which should have told me something, except I was too busy staring at a countdown only I could see to notice. 2 days, I told him, before he had even sat down. I do not know why I said it. Maybe because he was the only person in the room who had not asked me to fix it, prove it, or bleed for it. He was quiet a while, long enough that I nearly apologized for saying anything at all. The directors listened to more than the wardens liked to believe, he said finally, eyes on the counter, on the 1,000 small warm names carved into it. They just do not listen to numbers. Numbers are a warden's language, not theirs. I asked what language they did listen to. Tell me, I said, if you know something, tell me. He looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that makes you feel like the only person in a crowded room, except the room was empty except for the 2 of us, and a bowl of cooling stew. I can't, he said, not yet. I watched something move across his face that looked almost like grief for a rule he had not written either. Then, quiet, like he was changing the subject on purpose, he asked me something nobody in 3 years had bothered asking. What it cost me exactly to keep that cellar soft, not what Drager's ledger cost me, what it actually cost. I told him about the headache is. The mornings my hands shook too hard to pour cider. I did not tell him about the ash, because I did not fully understand the ash myself yet. I used to think being feared was the same as being needed, he said, quiet, almost to himself. Someday I would like to be wrong about that too. I asked what that was supposed to mean. He did not answer that either. He just said the other thing, the small thing, the thing I turned over so many times afterward it went soft at the edges like a coin worn thin in a pocket. If it ever comes down to that ledger, he said, I will stand in front of it myself. I laughed, because it was easier than asking what he meant. He did not laugh with me. He finished his stew, same as always, and left before I could find a version of thank you that did not sound like a question. Tamsin had come back 3 more times that week. Exactly as she said she would, each visit a little less about the trial and a little more about scratching Biscuit behind one enormous ear while he groaned like a rusted gate. Her companions had taken to waiting upstairs with a cider, used to it by now. I let it happen because it cost me nothing, and because watching a girl who had walked in terrified walk out delighted was, some days, the only proof I had that any of this was working the way I meant it to. She was due to leave for her next posting the following week. That final Tuesday visit was meant to be a goodbye, nothing more. Scratch the ears, say the thing you say to a dog the size of a cart horse, go home. I remember it was a good morning, right up until it wasn't. Sun through the windows, bread rising, Biscuit already dozing in a patch of light at the bottom of the stairs the way he does most mornings when nobody is scheduled to visit. I remember thinking, with the particular stupidity of someone who has not yet learned better, that maybe I would get through this one without anyone finding out how bad the numbers really were. The compliance run came a full day early, before I had even had the chance to fail a second time. Draeger arrived without warning and seized administrative control of the cellar the way the rulebook technically allows a warden to do during any sanctioned audit, and did it at the exact hour Tamsin Rill and her two companions happened to be inside, deep in the final chamber, saying goodbye to Biscuit before heading home. I felt it through the hearth before I understood what it was, a wrongness sharp and sudden like a string pulled tight and then further. Every word I had spent 3 years weaving around that wolf, every soft edge I had filed onto every trap in that cellar, went cold and dark all at once, like someone had reached past me and switched off a light I did not know I was standing inside. Biscuit does not know how to be gentle without those wards. Nobody built him gentle. I built the gentleness on top of him, patiently, the way you would teach an old dog a new trick, and Draeger had just stripped it off him in the space of a single administrative signature. I was down those cellar stairs before I finished deciding to move. I reached the final chamber in time to see him rear up over Tamsin exactly the way the rulebook had always intended, teeth first, ash gray and enormous, and finally, exactly as dangerous as his character sheet had always claimed. She did not even have time to scream properly. I am not sure I did either. I do not remember choosing to get between them. I remember the cold of the stone floor through my knees, and the strange, distant thought that I hoped Tamsin still got to see the wolf again someday, once this was over, once he was allowed to be soft again. The strike that should have opened me to the bone unraveled instead into ash. Pale, warm, pouring out of a wound that did not look like a wound so much as a place where something in me had simply stopped being solid for a moment. I have absorbed pieces of that cellar for 3 years, in small careful sips, the size of a bruise, the size of a headache. This was not a sip. This was the whole cup, all at once, and my knees hit the floor before I told them to, and for one long, white silent second I did not know whether I was going to be able to stand back up. Tamsin was screaming my name by then, both hands fisted in Biscuit's fur, trying to drag a mountain backward by main force. He was already going still beneath her, confused, the fight draining out of him now that whatever had been switched on in him had nowhere left to go but through me. Callum's face was the last clear thought I had before the room tilted, not his death. Just his face, ordinary, unremarkable, the way it looked on a Tuesday morning before any of this had a chance to matter. I remember thinking with a strange, floating calm, not like this. Not again. Not in front of a child. Then Draeger's voice arrived from the top of the stairs, flat and satisfied, already writing. There it is, she said. Unauthorized intervention. Physical mercy administered directly witnessed. I believe that is precisely the violation we discussed. She did not sound cruel saying it. That was somehow the worst part. She sounded like a woman closing a ledger at the end of a long, tedious day, relieved to finally have the number she had been waiting for. Nobody in that chamber moved. Tamsin was still crying, silently now, her hands still fisted in foregone calm beneath her. Old Nell, who had run down the stairs behind me without either of us noticing, stood frozen in the doorway with a healer's kit already open in her hands and nowhere useful left to put it. I tried to stand. My knees did not agree with the plan. Somewhere above me I heard Draeger's quill scratching against parchment, unhurried, the sound of a decision that had already been made and was simply being written down for the record. The room went cold before anyone spoke. Candles along the chamber wall guttered low all at once, like something had walked in ahead of itself. I understood the ash on his sleeve a half-second before I understood anything else. Celine, he said, and it was the same quiet voice that had ordered stew every Tuesday for 4 months, except now it filled the entire chamber without getting any louder, the way true things tend to. Put the seal away. Draeger turned. I have never before or since seen anyone's face empty itself that fast. Your Grace, she said, I wasn't informed you were on the premises. You weren't meant to be, he said. That was rather the point of Tuesdays. The only night this realm does not require me to be feared. Tamsin, still shaking, still fisted in Biscuit's fur, whispered a name I had only ever heard used for one figure in this realm, the one every traveler was meant to fear their way toward, the one the entire second half of this game had quietly been built around reaching. The Sable King. I sat on the cold stone floor of my own cellar, bleeding pale ash instead of blood, and looked up at the man who had fixed my shutter without being asked and thought, with what little clarity I had left, of course it was him. Nobody else has ever ordered the same bowl of stew for 4 months while guards went quiet around him for no stated reason. This is a warden's compliance matter, Draeger said, recovering fast. Credit to her. She is not authorized to intervene. She is exactly as authorized as I say she is, he said. I outrank your ledger, Celine, and I have since before you held the post. I have also kept your automated flags off this keeper's numbers for 3 years, quietly the old-fashioned way, a word here, a delayed report there. Update 6 does not ask a king's permission before it audits. That was the part I did not see coming in time. He knelt beside me on the cold stone, which put a king, however unofficial the title, below a bleeding innkeeper for the first time since either of us had held our positions. This isn't the first time I've carried you up those cellar stairs, Ren, he said, quiet enough that it wasn't really meant for Draeger at all. I just never had the right to say so before tonight. I couldn't be both the king and the man who fixes shutters. The realm doesn't allow it. So I chose Tuesdays. Tuesdays were the only day I got to be the second one. This goes to a director's review, he said, louder now to Draeger, to the room. In full. Or I walk out of every scripted encounter in this realm until someone above you explains why that risk was worth taking over one keeper's arithmetic. I had, at that exact moment, roughly 4,000 questions. I asked none of them because I was fairly busy turning to ash at the edges, and because some small, stubborn, deadpan part of me had already decided the correct response was, so that's why the stairs always smelled like smoke. The director's review convened within the hour, which I'm told is unusually fast, and which I experienced mostly from a cot in the corner while Nell packed my wounds in something that smelled like burnt sugar and stubbornness. I did not have to argue my own case. That turned out to be the strangest part. Someone, I still don't know who, brought in a slab of my own counter, the old oak, carved with 3 years of names, warm and faintly gold even in torchlight. They set it in the center of the chamber like evidence, because it was evidence, and let it simply sit there while the count was taken. What happened next is not something Draeger's ledger has a column for, and I am not sure I have the right words for it either. The counter simply got warmer, brighter. 40,000 small marks catching light from somewhere that was not the torches, until the whole slab glowed like a coal pulled fresh from a hearth, and every director in that chamber had to shield their eyes against a number Draeger had spent 3 years insisting was worth nothing at all. 40,000 names. 40,000 small warm marks where hearth had pooled and stayed patient, untallied, worth nothing on Draeger's ledger and, as it turned out, worth a great deal more than dread to a realm that needed travelers to keep walking back through its gates season after season. The second warden, Aldrich Penn, the one who had flinched at the word hearth, was the one who had quietly filed the report that got the review moving before midnight. Nobody thanked him out loud. I made sure to later. Garrick Thorne, of all people, was dragged in as a character witness for realm engagement he clearly hadn't expected to give. He did not look at me once. I let him keep that. The ruling was not gentle, but it wasn't slow either. Warden Celine Draeger was found to have knowingly endangered a minor keeper's registered visitor in order to manufacture evidence, a violation considerably heavier than anything she had ever accused me of. She was reassigned that same night to the tutorial zone, auditing thatch roof cottages and practice dummies, a post so far beneath her that I'm told she has not raised her voice once since starting it. The widow's trial was struck from the record. In its place, the directors entered a new name, the one still carved above my cellar door today. The Widow's Mercy, sanctioned content protected status cornerstone designation, unalterable without unanimous consent. No warden may audit it alone again. Nell tells me that's the single pettiest and most satisfying line item she has ever read aloud. Corvin came back the following Tuesday, same time as always. He did not sit in the corner. He sat at the bar instead, in full view of the common room, in full view of anyone who wanted to stare, which everyone did, extensively including Tamsin, who nearly fell off her stool. He ordered the stew, same as always. Then, for the first time in 4 months, he asked if he could stay past closing. I told him the inn didn't really have a closing anymore, not since a king kept threatening to unmake the realm's entire second act every time someone tried to schedule me before 9 in the morning. He almost smiled at that. I've decided almost counts coming from him. My hands don't shake anymore mostly. Nell says the absorption still happens, just gentler now, spread across a wider net since the realm itself started quietly reinforcing the wards instead of leaving me to hold them alone. I don't fully understand the mechanics. I've decided I don't need to. Biscuit gets his belly rubs. The haunted armor still asks travelers if they're drinking enough water, and now occasionally, whether they've told their mothers they love them, which nobody has ever once complained about. Mira Holt sent another jar of preserves the week the ruling came down, this time with a note that just said "told you so," which I have pinned above the bar next to a very official-looking parchment with a director's seal on it. Tamsin finished her posting and came back twice more before she shipped out for good, both times just to see the wolf, exactly as promised. I put a hand on the counter most nights before bed on the warmest, oldest names, the ones from the very first year. Cal's initials aren't among them. He never got to carve his own name into the thing he spent his Hort career protecting. I kept it soft, Cal. I tell the wood sometimes when the common room is empty, and it's just me and 40,000 small gold marks and one enormous sleeping wolf, I finally get to keep it soft. The Sable King still empties the color from 3 provinces every time he walks through their capitals. But every Tuesday, without fail, he orders the same bowl of stew from the only person in Hollowmere who was ever brave enough to make him feel safe instead of feared.